President Trump and NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte held a closed-door meeting after Trump spewed anger against NATO allies for not helping the US in the Iran war. In a recent interview, Mark Rutte clarified that NATO praises Trump's action for decimating Iran's nuclear capabilities. He also agreed that the US has made the world a safer place. But Trump has labeled NATO a failed alliance and has repeatedly signaled to leave. As Iran and the US finally agreed to a 2-week ceasefire, President Trump vehemently slammed NATO for its neutrality in the Iran war. Ever since the US and Israel launched a massive joint attack on Iran, the nation has moved to block the Strait of Hormuz in retaliation. The month-long blockade of the most strategic maritime channel crushed the economy worldwide. Iran's Hormuz closure halted the complete oil and gas supply, pushing prices and inflation to a historic level. Hormuz's seizure by Iran led Trump to demand support from its NATO allies. The US wanted NATO nations to intervene militarily to help secure the strategic maritime point. Trump even emphasized that since Europe and not the US has been affected by Hormuz's oil closure, they should ramp up forces in the Strait of Hormuz. However, to Trump's disappointment, NATO declined to get involved in the Iran war. The UK, France, Germany, Japan, and a few other nations offered patrolling of Hormuz, but only after the war was over. As per Trump's recent statements, it seems the US is feeling betrayed over NATO's lack of commitment. The Trump administration feels that the US wasn't helped by its allies when it needed them, signaling leaving NATO.
I have a direct quote from the President of the United States on NATO, and I will share it with all of you. They were tested and they failed. And I would add, it's quite sad that NATO turned their backs on the American people over the course of the last 6 weeks when it's the American people who have been funding their defense. As you know, President Trump will be meeting with Secretary Rutte in a couple of hours here at the White House, and I know he looks forward to having a very frank and candid conversation with him.
As per the law experts, the U.S. National Defense Authorization Act 2024 prohibits a U.S. president from doing so. A U.S. president cannot withdraw from NATO unless he/she garners a 2/3 Senate majority or an act of Congress. This law clearly limits Trump's ability to leave NATO on its own. A unilateral exit would create a constitutional crisis. The Iran war has undoubtedly brought the deepest rift between the US and NATO allies. It exposed Trump's previous doubts about NATO. The president, berating NATO, called it a paper tiger and established that NATO failed. Trump blasted NATO for not involving in Iran, even though the US is helping Ukraine against Russia. Even though Trump cannot quit NATO on his own, but being the commander-in-chief of US forces, he can call off troops from European regions, compromising the bloc's efficacy. The US provides its NATO allies with a security umbrella. It not only stations its troops across European bases, but also provides support with intelligence sharing, war equipment, training, and a rapid deterrence. Europe heavily relies on the United States' nuclear deterrence capabilities. US nuclear superiority acts as a shield for Europe against countries like Russia. The US's nuclear arsenal is bigger than that of France or UK. Some NATO nations like Germany, Italy, and Belgium host and share US nuclear arsenals. The US is the largest NATO contributor, and it provides tactical training. It aids and ensures NATO nations' security against West Asia or Russia by maintaining its bases in the region. NATO comprises approximately 970 million people. Its total GDP is close to half of the global economy. The US stations around 100,000 troops across its NATO allies. Having such a diversified military base equips the US with profuse military intelligence. It acquires the upper hand in surveillance and quick retaliation against the whole world like no other nation. NATO also provides the US with global influence, both economically and strategically. The 32 allies bloc ramps up the US's security and deterrence against several regional conflicts. NATO also acts as a channel through which America enjoys business preference across Europe. The alliance acts as a major market for the United States' defense exports. NATO does represent a powerful alliance and a mark of Atlantic unity. Leaving NATO might cause the US to lose a major chunk of global power, economic alliance, and security.